r/ask Reddit. What strange events have gotten swept under the rug like they didn't even happen? Replies to this thread that provided links will all be in the description box. Be sure to check it out. Starting last summer, there have been unidentified snipers taking out random cars on different parts of I-10 in New Orleans, and nothing has come of it, and nobody's really talking about it. I mean, gang and drug violence, neighborhood drive-bys, and the occasional bourbon shooting are one thing to ignore, but interstate snipers? Nobody finds that interesting? It's still happening. In 2020, New Orleans saw an average of 2 interstate shootings per month, and on January 12, a news release from the New Orleans Police Department detailed more than 30 interstate shootings in the Crescent City in 2021. 6 days later, they added 4 more victims to their list. Just before 3 p.m. on January 18, a Tuesday, a sniper killed 34-year-old Whitney Watts as she traveled eastbound on Interstate 10. Police realized something was amiss when the victim's black car crashed into a guardrail at the Crowder Boulevard exit in New Orleans East. The coroner found Whitney's assailant shot her multiple times. Earlier that morning, another I-10 gunshot hit a man on Michoud Boulevard, and the Saturday morning before that, January 15, the interstate sniper killed a 52-year-old man and wounded a 45-year-old woman on I-10 at Esplanade Avenue. Ironically, the United States' most infamous highway snipers killed only 7 people, far less than the multitude of attacks recounted here. If NOPD can connect even half of these shootings, the wound count of this new I-10 sniper surpasses that of the DC Beltway snipers. What the hell? It's got to be the rate at which people are being killed, cause when the DC snipers went on their rampage, it was all the news would talk about. In my hometown there was some sort of audit and it found that $8 million of taxpayer money was missing. It's a conspiracy now. T.I., rapper, and his wife have serially drugged and assaulted over 30 victims. According to 30-plus allegations. If you Google T.I., it doesn't even come up unless you specifically search for it. 500 billion rand. South Africa. Borrowed from the IMF for COVID. It evaporated. It will never be seen again. But I bet the taxpayers are gonna have to pay it back. The Las Vegas shooting. The worst mass shooting in America's history. Dozens dead. Hundreds injured. No one has any idea why this random dude stockpiled weapons and went on a mass murder spree. Or why he ended when he did. We all just collectively went, I guess we'll never know, and then forgot about it. In my hometown, the police chief was accused of having relations with an underage girl. The father of the girl was one of the officers on the force. He was later found dead near the property of the chief. People believe he was there to confront the chief about the relations. 9/11 happened, and the attention of the public got focused on the nation's tragedy. He is now the mayor. The Apollo 10 turd. It's been half a century and nobody has owned up to the floating turd on Apollo 10. The floods on the east coast of Australia super recently. We experienced 1,000 milliliters of rain in less than a day. Whole towns have been wiped out, there are landslides and people are still missing. There are no supplies, no food, no fuel, no electricity and no water. They are still finding bodies, and there are still people stranded on cliff faces and mountains that could collapse any minute. If you drive through Lismore, NSW right now, everyone's belongings are all in piles larger than the houses on the street. There is sewage and toxic waste covering thousands of square meters. Civilians have had to rescue people from bridges, off roofs and off mountains, risking their lives while suffering their losses to save others that are in a worse position. Thousands of civilians have been donating their own money, time and resources to help those in need. Our government has done nothing, and is shadow banning anyone speaking out on social media. The newspapers aren't covering it even though this is the worst natural disaster Australia has experienced in decades. Deaths are going unreported and the media is not covering anything. People have been screaming for the army and other qualified professionals to help. They have been begging to declare a state of emergency. It's taken 6 days for our Prime Minister to speak on this, and today he posted on Instagram some very staged images of the military helping. These photos show the army in clean clothes, pretending to do tasks and pretending to help. The army was literally instructed to go down there, get some pictures and leave. People literally have been taking photos of them getting photos done with ring lights and other professional lighting equipment. When civilians asked for their help, they said that's not our duty and went back to scrolling on their phones. I saw a news report about people attacking and eating people like they were zombies. 12 hours later, nothing about it, not even a retraction. This was about 12 years ago. I just figured they fixed zombies really fast. There were a string of attacks involving different forms of crystal meth. It is possible that there were copycat attacks, but it died down. Similarly, there was a string of pregnant women being cut open to steal the babies, over a few years, but it ended after one of the victims killed the attacker. The Westall UFO sighting. Sighted by hundreds of people in the middle of the day in 1966. All news archive footage of interviews has mysteriously vanished. Witnesses visited by men in suits who told them never to talk about it. The New York District Attorney, Alvin Bragg, no longer charges armed robbery as a felony. It's now misdemeanor petite larceny, meaning that an armed robber won't even lose his right to carry a weapon if he gets caught and convicted. The Panama Papers that expose the list of elite who were hoarding vast amounts of wealth in offshore bank accounts. Conveniently forgotten about entirely. I think the Canadian government hiding the fact there's hundreds of thousands of missing children with no trace. Some children actually burned inside furnaces. They actually burned tons of the paperwork to hide it. They occasionally find massive unmarked graves than nothing. Not so much strange, but you never hear about the Indonesian genocide of 1965 to 1966. Up to 1 million people, mostly communists or alleged communists, were killed, possibly even more. The West knew about it and did nothing, and it was suppressed by Suharto for the next 30 years. It's a truly shameful chapter in the modern history of the world. We've had a spate of missing children from all over my state, 3 within a number of weeks. One was found days later drinking from a creek like nothing happened, nothing more was said in the news, didn't hear anything. Another girl disappeared for a week, was murdered, and the killer, stepfather, was arrested. The mother was mentally unstable, admitted to hospital, and couldn't make a statement. Nothing more was said, haven't heard anything since. Finally, the body of a baby was found in a freezer. The mother was arrested and cooperated with police, was eventually released without charges being pressed. Again, nothing more was said, no news, nothing. It's incredibly frustrating. It makes me feel like these children are going to be forgotten, especially the ones who were killed. We need to say their names, learn their story, prevent it from happening again. Ever heard of #BringBackHerGirls? Of course you have. What you likely haven't heard of is Boko Haram killing and kidnapping all of those boys. Over 10,000 boys were killed and kidnapped. The kidnapped were forced to be soldiers. And only the local newspapers for the villages affected would cover the story. They noticed this, and moved on to kidnapping, but not killing, just under 300 girls, who they were previously letting go free during their gendered terrorism. The world erupted in solidarity. Bring back our girls, celebrities, politicians, mainstream media, and activists shouted. But despite the girls being taken in the same attacks as the boys were being kidnapped and killed, the coverage and support was entirely on the girls. The very few people, mostly YouTubers, who even mentioned the boys were called misogynists for not focusing on the girls. Boko Haram killing and kidnapping over 10,000 boys, roughly 98% of the total victims, was completely swept under the rug. I personally use this as an example of the gendered empathy gap. That the number of female victims only has to be roughly 2% to completely overshadow male victims. It's bad to use such a tragedy to make a point, but it is such a perfect example. The USA backing Saudi Arabia with weapons to go to war with the people of Yemen. Hundreds of thousands died as a result of the war and about 25% are children. We essentially allowed them this war because we stepped on their toes by invading Iraq, because they saw Iraq as a buffer zone between them and Iran. US government supplies them with hundreds of billions of dollars worth of weapons every year. We do this because of the petrodollar in which Saudi Arabia agrees to make all their oil sale and used, which helps strengthen the dollar. Metcalf sniper attack. On a random day in 2013, somebody in California decided to go underground and cut phone lines. 30 minutes later, professional snipers sprayed the Metcalf power substation for 20 minutes. They severely damaged all transformers and cost the company $15 million. Literally a minute before the police arrive, the snipers began fleeing. How did they get in? Why were they so emboldened to shoot for 20 darn minutes? What were their motivations? And why run away right before the police car arrived? To this day, no one knows who these guys are. No fingerprints were found. We tend to take things like infrastructure for granted, and it's events like this that make me feel queasy because the perpetrators got off scot-free and probably paved the path for future copycats around the country. Not necessarily strange but terrifying. Since the 80s there has been a group of Christian anti-nuclear pacifists called the Plowshare Movement. They have broken into numerous nuclear arms facilities over the years to peacefully protest and have got into major trouble, with many of them receiving multiple prison sentences for their efforts with no intent to stop. But the major takeaway from their activities is how shockingly easy it was for them to plan and gain access to these facilities. Sometimes it would be hours before they were discovered by military personnel after gaining access to sites. And it begs the question that if they're a peaceful protest group, what would happen if a terrorist organization were to attempt it? There's a book about it called Gods of Metal. The Northeast blackout of 2003. I remember news reports of the outage being caused by virus entering into a power plant in Ohio's network through a vendor's network. It was in a number of security classes that I had taken at the time about making sure your vendors follow your organization's security policies and practices. Fast forward today and it seems as that part never happened and it was attributed to something else instead. It's bizarre because I clearly remember the discussions in class circa 2003 through 2005 in my bachelor degree classes. I cannot even find the original news articles and case studies that were once part of the classes I had taken. This is a big one for me, although not too surprising. Gregory Douglas, a journalist who taped his interviews with former CIA operative Robert Crowley over a period of 4 years, recorded their telephonic conversations and later published their transcribes in a book titled Conversations with the Crow. Crowley claimed that CIA was responsible for eliminating Dr. Homi Bhabha, Indian nuclear scientist whose plane crashed into Alps, when he was going to attend a Vienna conference, and also eliminating Indian Prime Minister Lal Bahadur Shastri, who died at Tashkent summit in 1966. Crowley said that a bomb in the cargo section of the plane went off in mid-air, bringing down the commercial Boeing 707 airliner in Alps with little evidence left to be retrieved. Crowley claimed that U.S. was wary of Indian nuclear progress and the defeat of their ally Pakistan in 1965 war. U.S. was worried that India could well dominate the Indian subcontinent along with Russian think tanks if India develops nuclear capabilities, thus bringing instability to the region, as seen. The fact that Henry Ford was a Nazi and published numerous works against Jewish people. He is praised for being such an industrial genius, even having schools and institutions named in his honor. It blows my mind how such an evil man that committed atrocities against a race can be celebrated. Our Minister for Energy, Australia, was formerly a director of a shell company that made a 27 million Australian dollar profit selling water rights back to the government, for water that didn't exist. Denver. A box of heads was stolen out of a truck recently, and that was the end of that story. Like WTF. So many questions. The fact that the US Navy straight up released official footage of fighters intercepting UFOs. The USA tested nuclear bombs on people of the Bikini Islands. They dropped thousands of nuke of over 20 years. The final compensation offered to these human test subjects was equivalent to the USD value of one bomb. The people are still living in radioactive fall with a slew of health issues. Nobody ever talks about this. On September 10, 2001, Donald Rumsfeld went on national television, I watched it live, and said that the Pentagon was missing $2.3 trillion. But he said, not to worry, there would be a full audit to find where all the money went. The Pentagon accounting department with the records, and responsible for doing that audit, was hit by an unidentified flying object the next day. The only backups for that data were kept in a federal office in Building 7 of the World Trade Center. There is a serial killer somewhere in Montana that has killed people and dressed them like farm animals. Over 800 tons of dead sea life including dolphins, washed up in Tampa Bay due to a fertilizer plant spill. Never heard about this disaster again. The annexation of Hawaii by U.S. The American Christian missionaries go to Hawaii. Give Bible to locals, take their lands. Become rich sugar plantation owners. Become influential. Then they want their own governance. Wage war against Hawaii government while on their land. Invite American warship to the shores for assistance. DC sends it. Hawaii loses. America owns Hawaii. Later bill is passed making it a state. Next another bill is passed to Americanize Hawaii. Via this bill, all Samoan culture is banned, its history is banned, language is banned. English becomes the main language. In one generation, the kids coming out of the schools are true patriots singing Star-Spangled Banner. How during the investigation of the Gabby Petito murder, a huge number of missing people were found dead in the same area. Last week 22 elephants have been flown from Namibia to Dubai after having been sold under dubious circumstances and only the slightest nod in the direction of sites. Wasn't there a bombing in Nashville on Christmas last year or something? Literally was just swept under the rug as if a bombing in a city isn't a big deal. 1. In 1988, Pan Am Flight 103 crashed after a bomb was detonated 40 minutes into the flight. The swept under the carpet part is that a lot of the people on board didn't die through impact injuries but from exposure waiting for help, and one of the official UK reports details the first people on the scene trying to treat people who were still very much alive. 2. Following the Chernobyl explosion, the contamination reached the north of the UK and fell on the hillsides. It took 23 years from the first test showing that lamb from these hillsides were radioactive for the testing of the meat to be declared safe enough to be sold without each animal testing being required. The mass PBB poisoning of Michigan in the 1970s. We all drank poison milk, farmers were devastated, people died, areas became devoid of life, and the poison remains in the soil and groundwater in huge areas of Michigan. Research properties carefully if you plan to buy in Michigan. Cutter incident. A lot of Midwestern and West Coast children were given a vaccine for polio, which actually gave a lot of the kids polio. Someone dumped specific stock in the airlines a day or two before 9/11. It was explained in the press that stock sales of that sort are tracked by law enforcement because it suggests advanced knowledge of an event. We never heard who it was that knew and profited off of it. The story just disappeared. The meteor that broke up over a Russian city in 2013. It caused extensive damage, injured over 1,400 people, blew out windows, hospitalized over 100 people, caused temporary blindness and intense sunburns. People here just shrugged when I told them about it. I mean, a few hours difference and it would have been a North American or Western European city. Is it just that it seemed distant to people here? I just assumed that a meteor breaking up over a populated area would be a bigger deal. One morning just outside my hometown, a man was out walking his dog around a local forest. At the back of this forest is a field with a long walkway surrounded by crops on either side. In the middle of the walkway was a shoe with a severed human foot inside. It was big news for a few weeks, but nothing ever came of it. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe and share in the comments below about an event you know of that was just ignored by everyone.